Okay, so here's where we are on Caleb Willaims. Yesterday, Colin Cowherd came out and said that he was told Caleb Willaims didn't want to play in Chicago. I'm sure he got off the air and his phone that he usually leaves in his dressing room, plugged in, was buzzing. And when he got back to his dressing room, there was a Whiskey Tango Foxtrot or two from either the Bears or maybe Caleb Willaims' camp. So here's what will likely happen in the media. Okay? It's a Friday. It doesn't matter. It's the lead up to the Super Bowl, so there's not a lot going on. Big college hoops weekend. Maybe LeBron gets traded, although that all of a sudden now has been denied in the media, even though the story came out in the media last night. So it's not going along. Not a lot going on. So we'll talk about whatever we can talk about. So I'm sure there's people going to say, Colin's got terrible information, bad information. My guess, and maybe more understanding, is he just has dated information. That there was definitely a time where Caleb Willaims' dad or camp or Caleb Willaims himself was like, I don't want to go to Chicago, man. I do not want to go to Chicago. Outdoors. Yuck. They don't have dudes. Offense is a mess. No thanks. But have you seen what's happened in Chicago in the offseason? Right? What's happened in Chicago in the offseason is they've cleaned house with the offensive side of the football. And one of the guys that they've been kicking around trying to hire is Cliff Kingsbury. Now, most people think Cliff Kingsbury will end up being the offensive coordinator with the Las Vegas Raiders. But what you have to read tea leaves here, okay? That's what you have to do. You have to read tea leaves. Okay? And the Bears have gone out and added Jason Hogtiling, who's an offensive line coach, right? And he was a former offensive line coach with the Tennessee Titans. If you know anything about the Tennessee Titans, you're like, oh, they got a good offensive line, right? And he's been an offensive coordinator at Williams, at Wagner, Cornell, Colgate, but his specialty is offensive line. Right? That's what, and the offensive coordinator they hired was Luke Getsy. You're like, oh wait, that guy also comes over from Tennessee. And the guess is that the way it works is that they're not going to allow Caleb Willaims to handpick his offensive coordinator. That's probably why they kicked the tires on Cliff Kingsbury. Okay? But when you fire Luke Getsy and you leave the position open, what you do is, and you know, you have the reputation of, hey man, their offense has been a mess. They got to figure this thing out. The reason that Caleb Willaims is no longer closed to the idea of Chicago is because he's going to get to handpick on some levels his offensive staff that he works with. Does it make sense? Like, look, he's not going to pick his offensive line coach. They picked it, but he's like, man, we need an offense. Well, I got to feel good about it. I got to feel really good about what we're running, and I got to feel really good about who's blocking for me. And then I got to feel really good about, can we get some dudes to throw to? And they're sitting there going, hey, look, we have a second high first-round pick. We have the number 1 pick overall, which we're going to use on you. And we have whatever we'll get for Justin Fields. And with that, we're going to support you with a great new offensive coordinator who's going to work with you in a style that you can play. And we're going to get a really good we're going to continue to work on fixing our offensive line. Keep in mind, our general manager is a former offensive lineman in the NFL. And then we're going to use some of our picks to get the best skill position talent we can possibly get. So Colin's information wasn't bad. Colin's information was if Luke Getsy was still the offensive coordinator and things remained the same. You didn't think it was weird that they cleaned house in the offense and left the defense the same? Why would they do that? Oh, hey, by the way, a week later, this story comes out that Caleb Willaims didn't want to play in Chicago. I mean, these things aren't hard dots to connect, are they? right? So Shane Waldron becomes their offensive coordinator, and I'm sure that the information that he had, okay, the information that Colin had was he's around SC all the time. He's around USC all the time. And take a look at Shane Waldron's background, right? Here's a guy who was the passing game coordinator with the LA Rams. Here's a guy who's the offensive coordinator with the Seattle Seahawks the last 2 years. And I'll grant you, like Dan can tell you, they were bad this year. They were not good. And most of the blame gets put on Geno, kind of regressing towards the mean. But last year, I thought they were pretty good. But Shane Waldron is a McVay guy. He was with McVay and all those guys on that Washington Redskins coaching staff going back to 2016. So what it feels like to me, and again, I don't have information the way that Colin had information. And I'm not criticizing Colin. I'm actually supporting him. Feels like to me that Colin, for a long time, they're like, dude, I don't want to play for Luke Getsy in Chicago. That's a mess. No thanks. And then what had happened is in the last 2 weeks ago, the clear house. Last week, the hire coordinator. And oh yeah, by the way, like it's not Kingsbury who was at SC this year. That signifies, and look, maybe the reason that Colin said he prefers the Raiders is because Kingsbury might end up being with the Raiders as their offensive coordinator, has been long rumored to be. But the guess is that they said, hey, look, we know what you want. We know how you want to play. We want to support you. We're not going to do what we've been doing offensively. We searched. We found this is a McVay guy. That's the offense that he runs. We're going to go out and get the best offensive line coach. They go get the guy from Tennessee. They've had a good offensive line for several years. Guys in the market, this is what we're putting together. And your opinion changes. And this is no different than how it works in recruiting, how it works when you change jobs. You know? In recruiting, you sit there and go like, man, I don't want to play with that guy. I don't want to play for that guy. Like, don't worry, that guy's not going to be there. You know? So you just wait and wait and wait and wait. I don't think what Colin said was speaking out of turn. I think what Colin said was he didn't want to play for Luke Getsy. And he probably wants to play for Cliff Kingsbury. And the Bears probably thought, well, we'd take Kingsbury, but they're not, I would guess, in love with Kingsbury's style of running the football, although it really improved in Arizona. Let me ask you, Dan Byer. Okay. You've seen Waldron up close and personal last 2 years. You watch every Seahawks game. If you put a more talented quarterback in his offense, do you like it?
Yeah, he's okay. I wasn't in love with him. There's some strengths to it in terms of what they've done with Geno Smith. What is interesting about Waldron was brought in when Russell Wilson was able to have input on the offensive coordinator position. So in that scenario and what he did with the Seahawks, his addition to Pete Carroll's staff coming over from the Rams was a statement because it was, wow, Russell Wilson is 1-1 over Pete Carroll. Now, you mentioned last season, meaning 2022, that they were better offensively, and they just didn't have an identity. And I think that's part of maybe the issues with what the Seahawks were having last year is we didn't know if they were a running team or a passing team. But for Waldron's case, for the work that he did with Geno Smith, I think is what helps him get this job with the Chicago Bears. You mentioned his previous ties that he had, obviously with McVay and that staff, but I think it's what they've done over the last 2 years to make Geno Smith a decent quarterback in the National Football League. They weren't consistent on offense.
Right. So there's another, I mean, like, look, you can make it sound demeaning to Geno Smith, but the reality is he's been a guy who, as a starter, didn't look like he was good enough, was a career backup, and Seattle didn't know what they were going to do at the quarterback position going back a year ago, and they had a really, really good year. Like, he got a massive raise. He had a really good year. And so I'm sure part of the sale is like, look, if he can do that with Geno Smith, imagine what he can do with you.
Yeah.
You know? Imagine what he can do with you. And then you throw out the McVay. Everybody loves the McVay system, the McVay style. And, you throw in Matt Stafford tape and all the different throws. And, hey, here's how you really want to play. I think the problem that I have heard with the Kingsbury style is it leaves the quarterback unprotected too often. That's the feeling, that it doesn't have the proper pass protections for a quarterback. And I'm sure that scares Caleb Willaims a little bit, in that he got hit a lot this year. Now, he also holds the ball a lot, right? Kind of similarly to Russell Wilson, similarly to there's a lot of Ben Roethlisberger holds it because he was so big, guys would fall off him. He holds it a lot. He's not one of these get it and get rid of it quick guys. And if you hold it in Kingsbury's offense, you're going to get murdered. You got to get rid of that sucker quick. Pick a spot, throw it to it. But again, my point is more, this reminds me, it reminds me of, do you remember when there was conference expansion the first time? Okay, when Texas was going to leave for the Pac-12? And I can't remember who reported that Texas was leaving for the Pac-12, that it was done. Okay? And then all of a sudden the next day it wasn't done. And the point was that I still come back on today was it was actually done. Texas had told people, we're out, we're leaving. And then ESPN, the Big 12, got together in the middle of the night and was like, hey, how can we get these guys to stay? Like, what if we throw them the Longhorn, give them the Longhorn channel, okay? We'll give them, we'll give them a bigger number so that in addition to making more money than everybody else in the league, they make even more money because they can support their own TV network on some level. And so if you went to bed the night before with that news and you woke up the next day, you're like, hey, that was a BS story. It wasn't a BS story. The story just changed. That's the same thing that happened with Caleb Willaims. I believe, Colin, there's too many stories of people saying, I don't know if he wants to play, if he's the number one overall pick, if he wants to go. That was, I don't want to go to Chicago. I don't want to go to Chicago. Now, by the way, to me, the best way to get yourself out of Chicago is not to let any of this stuff out. Is to go to Chicago and go like, look, I'm not playing for you guys, but I'm also not going to hurt the trade value of this piece. So all you got to do is trade me. I will shake hands, kiss babies, look like I'm coming here no matter what. You guys have to move me because I will not show up for the first day at work. Period. Stop. I don't believe that's what's happened. You can't look at what the Bears have done, gutting their offensive staff, hiring a new offensive coordinator, hiring a new offensive line coach, and think that they did it just on a whim, hoping it would work out because the offense wasn't good. No. They had to find who they thought was the best possible fit. And I'm sure they got some guidance from people around Caleb Willaims. Why wouldn't you do that? Because the last thing you want is Caleb Willaims to play like Justin Herbert's playing, where, what year are we on now? We on year 4? Is this year 4 or year 5 coming up? I think this is year 5 for Justin Herbert. And he's had like a different coordinator every year. Now you get different voice, different verbiage again. Third time in 4 years, you have a different, or third time in 3 years, you have a different offensive coordinator. That's a lot.